Winning was a compulsion for Leia, a fire in her blood that had to be fed, regardless of the cost. It wasn't just about being right. It was about the visceral satisfaction of the verbal checkmate, the moment her opponent's eyes would flicker with defeat. Even during their smallest, most trivial disagreements, over whose turn it was to take out the recycling, or what to watch on TV, she needed that final piercing word, a silver-tongued dagger sharp enough to irrevocably prove her point. That particular evening, the fight had started over nothing. A forgotten carton of milk left on the counter, souring in the late afternoon heat. But the embers of a long, frustrating day at work were still glowing within her, and her frustration quickly got the better of her. Her tone grew harsher, metallic. Her words came faster, tumbling over one another in a reckless cadence, until one perfectly crafted, vicious sentence slipped out before her brain could engage her filter. "You argue too much for a man," she said, her voice dripping with a cold, clinical disdain. "No wonder you're lacking in that area." The moment the words left her lips, the very atmosphere in their sun-warmed living room shifted. The air didn't explode. It seemed to contract, to cave in on itself, sucking all the sound and oxygen out of the space. The distant, cheerful chirping of crickets outside the window suddenly sounded miles away. Marcus didn't shout. He didn't fire back with the same cruelty. He simply froze. The light in his eyes, usually so warm and alert, guttered out. She saw the minute physical reactions. The tendon in his jaw tightening into a hard knot, his right hand curling into a fist so tight his knuckles stretched white against his skin, the easy slouch of his shoulders squaring into a rigid defensive line. His eyes, usually the color of rich earth, darkened into something flat and impenetrable, swirling with something far heavier and more profound than simple rage. It wasn't anger that held him so terrifyingly still. It was a raw, naked humiliation, a deep old wound she hadn't even known existed, now splitting wide open right before her. Without a single word, without even a glance in her direction, he turned on his heel. The sound of his footsteps on the hardwood floor was eerily precise as he walked away, leaving her standing alone amidst the wreckage of their argument. Leia stood anchored in the silence, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was half expecting him to storm back in like he always did, his face flushed, ready for another heated round. But he didn't. The silence stretched, thickening into something jagged and palpable, a physical presence in the room that cut her far deeper than any retaliatory words ever could. That night, the familiar dip of the mattress, the warmth of his body beside hers, never came. She lay stiffly in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house settle around her. She thought maybe he'd slip in later, once he thought she was asleep, and that tomorrow they'd wake up and perform the familiar dance of a grudging truce, falling back into their usual rhythm over too strong coffee. But in the morning, the pale dawn light revealed his side of the bed perfectly smooth and untouched, the pillow still fluffed. An uneasy, cold knot twisted deep inside her gut. She searched the quiet house, her bare feet cold on the floors, until she found him. He was in the spare room, a space that always smelled faintly of dust and disuse. He was sitting stiffly at the very edge of the narrow bed, still dressed in yesterday's clothes, his hands resting on his knees, staring at a blank spot on the wall opposite him as if it held the answers to everything. He wasn't sulking, wasn't brooding in a way that invited inquiry. He was simply gone. His body was there, but the essence of him, the man she knew, had retreated to some distant, inner place she could no longer reach. From the doorway, her voice felt too small for the void between them. "Marcus," she called. No reply, not even a twitch to acknowledge her. Her voice grew tighter, more pleading. "Why are you in here? Are you still upset? Will you come back to our room?" His eyes barely flicked toward her, not quite meeting her gaze, before returning to the wall. When he did finally speak, his voice was soft, almost weightless, stripped of all its usual resonance. Yet it carried a finality heavier than any shouted anger. Days passed. He did not return. Their home became a map of avoidance. If she entered the kitchen, he would finish pouring his coffee and leave. If she spoke, asking a benign question about the mail or the weather, he would offer a silent nod or nothing at all. If she, in a moment of brave desperation, reached out to brush his hand, he would stiffen as if electrocuted, pulling his arm away as if her touch burned. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was a cold war. It felt like the end. Desperate, Leia tried everything she could think of, scrambling for purchase on a cliff that was crumbling beneath her. She spent an afternoon preparing his favorite meal, a rich beef bourguignon that had always made him smile, the way his mother used to make. He ate it methodically, without tasting, without comment. She left handwritten notes on his desk. "I'm so sorry. I love you. Please talk to me." Little paper gestures of apology. He would move them aside to get to his laptop, ignoring them completely. She tried old inside jokes, brushing against him accidentally in the hallway, playing a song from their first dance at their wedding. She was met with a wall of nothing. A void where her husband used to be. That was when the cold, drenching realization truly struck her. She had always believed, fundamentally, that arguments, no matter how harsh, how mean, meant there was still a fire burning between them. Heat, even angry heat, meant life. If they were still shouting, they still cared enough to engage. But this silence, this absolute zero void, was different. It was the sound of a fire gone completely cold. It was the sound of something already broken beyond the reach of her voice. She hadn't understood that her words had been a precision strike, reaching a place far deeper than the present moment. They had tapped into a well of ancient pain. Marcus carried scars from long before her, scars he had meticulously hidden from the world, and from himself. As a painfully skinny teenager, he had been mocked relentlessly, cruel whispers about his late development trailing him like a shadow through the locker room hallways. In high school, a single baseless comment from a jealous rival, a hissed little Marcus in the showers, turned into an endless, corrosive rumor that ate away at him for years. He could still picture, with photographic clarity, the look on the face of Sarah, the girl he'd once thought he loved, when someone whispered that rumor to her at a party. Her face didn't crumple in sympathy. It just went cold, detached, her eyes looking through him as though he had ceased to exist as a man. Later, in adulthood, the wound was brutally deepened. His last serious partner before Leia, Chloe, had betrayed him. He'd come home early from a business trip, his suitcase full of a souvenir he thought she'd love, only to find her in their bed with his supposed best friend. And when he'd stood there, shattered, demanding an explanation, she hadn't cried or begged for forgiveness. She'd only shrugged, wrapped the sheet around herself, and said the 7 words that would haunt his every insecure moment. "You're just not enough for me." From that day, Marcus became an architect of his own fortifications. He built immense, invisible walls around that pain, hiding it so well he almost convinced himself he was fine. Then came Leia. With her fiery spirit and her fierce love, he felt truly seen. He felt whole. He believed her love had been the final, healing balm, that the past had finally, truly, lost its grip on him. Until that night. "You argue too much for someone who's hardly a man. No wonder you're lacking." One careless, brilliantly cruel sentence, and it all shattered. The walls he'd built, the healing he'd done, it vaporized. Suddenly he was 15 again, standing exposed and helpless in a crowded locker room. He was 26 again, standing in the doorway of his own betrayal. Only this time, the wound wasn't from a school bully or a faithless partner. It came from Leia, the one person whose opinion mattered most, the one person he had trusted with the fragile core of himself. For the first time since their marriage began, he truly wondered if he could ever look at her the same way again, or if he would always see the ghost of every past humiliation reflected in her eyes. Leia held on to the thin, fraying hope that time would simply fix it, that he would just get over it. But with every passing, silent day, Marcus only pulled further away, retreating deeper into his fortress. One evening, she gathered her courage and walked into the spare room, determined to try one more time to bridge the gap. He wasn't there. The room was empty, but the sound of the shower running down the hall filled the silence. His phone, however, lay lit up on the rumpled bedsheet. She never snooped. She prided herself on that. But her eyes, scanning the room for any clue to his state of mind, caught the stark words on the bright screen. It was an email preview. The subject line was brutally clear: initiating divorce proceedings. Her breath caught in her throat, a painful, sharp hitch. Divorce. The word was a physical blow. She told herself it was a mistake, a spam email, anything, but deep in her soul, in the cold pit of her stomach, she already knew the truth. The silence had been telling her for weeks. When Marcus emerged minutes later, a towel around his waist, his skin flushed with steam, she was still standing there, the image of those words burned onto her retinas. "Are you really thinking of ending our marriage?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, raw with pain. "Over one fight?" For the first time in weeks, his eyes fully met hers. And what she saw there terrified her more than any anger. There was no fury, no heartbreak, only a vast, hollow emptiness, like looking into a deep, dry well. His voice was steady, devoid of all emotion. "You think this is just about that one night?" And in that moment, standing in that cold little room, she finally understood. It wasn't only her cruel remark. It was everything. It was the accumulated weight of every bully's taunt, every whispered rumor, the profound betrayal of his ex, the slow drift they had both been ignoring in their marriage. That night, her words had simply been the final stone that broke the dam. Desperation now drove her completely. She poured every ounce of her energy into trying to fix the unfixable. She apologized with words, with actions, with grand gestures and small, tender efforts to reach him, to remind him of the love they once shared, of the future they had planned. He responded when necessary with short, hollow replies. "It's fine. Don't worry about it." His silence, however, was its own deafening answer. Did he still want to stay? She didn't need him to say it aloud anymore. His profound absence, even when he was in the same room, was loud enough. She had always operated on the belief that regret could be undone, that love was a powerful glue that could patch over any mistake, no matter how deep. But she was learning, in the most brutal way possible, that some wounds are too deep. They don't just damage the surface, they sever something essential underneath. One night, she pushed open the door to the spare room and found him packing. A large black suitcase lay open on the bed like a gaping wound. His clothes, his sweaters, his jeans, the shirt she'd bought him for his birthday, were being folded with a grim, methodical precision and placed inside. Pure, undiluted panic surged through her veins, cold and electric. "Are you really leaving?" she whispered, the words scraping her throat. Marcus didn't look at her right away. He finished folding a sweater, his movements slow and deliberate. He exhaled a long, weary breath, his hands resting on the edge of the suitcase for support, before he finally turned. His tone was steady, but it carried the weight of the truth she most feared. "I don't know if I can get past this," he said. "I just don't know." Those quiet words struck her harder than any rage ever could. They held a finality that a scream never would. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and immediate, as her last vestiges of pride crumbled to dust. "I love you," she whispered, her voice trembling, breaking. "I made a terrible, terrible mistake. I wish more than anything that I could take it back. Please, just tell me what to do. I'll do anything." For the first time in weeks, something flickered in his expression. It wasn't the emptiness that had been there before. It was a fracture in that void, a glimpse of hesitation, of internal conflict, of the man she loved wrestling with his pain. He paused, studying her tear-streaked face, then spoke quietly, each word measured. "You can't unsay what you said, Leia. And I can't unhear it." Her heart plummeted. Sure, this was the end. But then he added, his voice even softer. Maybe I'm not ready to leave. Not yet." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a promise of a future, or even a guarantee he'd stay through the week. But it was something. A fragile, thin thread of possibility. That night, the suitcase was placed back in the closet, though it remained unpacked. Marcus stayed, though the chasm of distance between them lingered, filled with a new, tentative and exhausting uncertainty. The scars they both knew would remain. The road to healing, if it even existed, would be long and painful and offered no guarantees. Lying awake later, listening to the rhythm of his breathing from the other side of the bed, Leia understood something fundamental had changed. Love wasn't about winning arguments. It wasn't about having the last word. It was a fragile thing, and it was about surviving the wounds you inevitably inflicted on each other. It was about choosing to stay and tend to those wounds, even when every instinct told you to run. Whether their love was strong enough to survive this, only time would tell. and the waiting had just begun.